So today I've got the pleasure to talk to Dr. Jasjit Singh, an associate professor at the University of Leeds, with his research focusing on the religious and cultural lives of South Asians in Britain, with a particular focus on religious and cultural transmission and on the representation of religious minorities. So, with all that out of the way, first of all, I have to say thank you, and then secondly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, not a problem. I think we've discussed a few times about doing this, so I'm glad that we've finally done it.
It's all good.
And it's awesome to see you as well. So yeah,
Thanks,
no. How has everything been? Obviously, like as a university professor, like COVID would have kind of, well, I'm assuming it kind of just completely destroyed.
What it did, I mean, so when it first happened in March 2020, everything went online. So it was lectures and seminars. This year, thankfully, it's been better. So this year we've had lectures recorded, but seminars have been in person because they're smaller groups. Yeah. So I've had more seminars to do, but they've been smaller groups. But the main thing is I've actually been in person. So, and actually students have said that they seem to prefer recorded lectures because you can kind of go back and watch things again. And the lecture format is more of a kind of knowledge dump anyway. So the seminars is where you can discuss things with people. So that's really where you need the interaction, and that didn't really work very well online. I should say. I think lectures work well online, but where you want people to kind of discuss things with one another, the online's not so great. But anyway, it's been much better this year. Yeah.
What's the situation now though with like Omicron and kind of?
Well, luckily we finished last week. So luckily we finished before everything kicked off. Yeah. I was in person last week, last Thursday, and it's so now they handed their essays in. So I'm marking at the moment, but we'll see obviously how things develop next semester. I'm actually on leave next semester. I'm actually hoping to write a book next semester, so nice. I'll be working from home.
Can I try and ask what the book's?
Yeah, no, sure. So you might have seen I did an online survey of Sikhs and their engagement with the digital arena, and how Sikhi online has impacted on their religious transmission. So hopefully it's going to be about what it means to be a Sikh in a digital world. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, I guess that kind of works out because there's quite a few things that I wanted to discuss with you today. Obviously, one is your CREST report. The other one is your son and kind of the work he's done against racism. And that, I think that, like, for me, seeing a little sing on BBC was just awesome to see that. And I think I had... So this is kind of like a bit of a tangent, but
go for it.
Sidhu Moosewala or whatever his name is did a song with a British artist, Steel Bangles, like quite a few years ago now, and it got a lot of kind of like negatives and whatever, but for me the only positive and similar thing kind of with your son, it's on a bigger scale, but a similar thing is to just see that visual image of someone who's kept their gears absolutely, like as an adult almost, you're just like, oh my gosh, imagine if I had seen that as a child growing up, because like I know things were completely different for your generation, but we never had.
Absolutely.
And so to see Little Sing on BBC is awesome. It's so awesome.
It was actually 2 years today that his he interviewed some of the sports personalities at Sports Personality Year, and it's literally 2 years today where he met Ben Stokes and Asher Smith, and he just met all these people on the red carpet. It was awesome, man. He's done really well. He's done honestly every opportunity we've given him so far. He's completely taken on. So yeah, absolutely.
I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up doing something like interviews, like media based, something like that. I watched a few of the interviews that he did, and he's just so relaxed and natural, and I'm just like, wow.
I'm really proud of him.
It is awesome. Okay, before we dig into that though, what we normally like to do with our guests is just to get to know a little bit more about yourselves, your family history, how we all in the diaspora ended up where we are. So feel free to start wherever you feel comfortable and then kind of just go from there.
Yeah, sure. So born and bred in Bradford. So born in the early 70s. So I've got a good Dari gene. So I've often been told I look younger than I actually am. So yeah. And Bradford's obviously an interesting place to grow up in terms of its kind of ethnic diversity. It's pretty much seen as a bicultural city. So growing up, education. Then went to uni to study computer science and accounting, like a good Sikh boy, to do, you know, good marriage prospects and all that. Then went into IT as a career in kind of the mid 1990s. Yeah. And then, you know, got married in the kind of early 2000s. And it's interesting because I reflect on my journey quite often, actually. So I got married in the early 2000s, and obviously, you know, in the mid 90s, you know, Bhangra, the Bhangra scene was kind of kicking off. So saw the old groups, Salap and Hira and all that, saw them live, and the hip hop scene was kicking off as well. So Public Enemy were really big, NWA were really big as well. So, you know, kind of the radical hip hop was emerging in the late 80s. Ice Cube and that in the early 90s. I saw Cypress Hill live at least 3 times. Saw House of Pain, Cypress Hill. So yeah, I managed to get to quite a variety of gigs when I was growing up.
That's insane.
Yeah, exactly. Insane's the right word with Cypress Hill. So yeah, all good. You know, always kept my gears. Born and brought up in a family where my dad wears a dastar. My granddad as well. You know, they came over from East Africa. Dad came over in the 1960s. So yeah, you know, I say always kept a dastar. Always, you know, generally kind of, you know, interested in Sikhi. Attended some of the Sikh Mission Society camps that took place in the late 80s. So they were good. They were kind of all around the country. So there was one in like Leeds and Coventry and Walsall and the like as well. My dad was always involved in the Gurdwara, so, you know, I went to the Gurdwara regularly as well. So kind of, you know, a pretty strong Sikh upbringing. I was always interested in reading Sikh history and the like as well. And then, so as I say, did the degree, got married, then started thinking about, you know, doing some kind of formal study on Sikhi, because I'd done lots of reading, but I wanted to kind of have some sort of structure to it. And at the same time, kids wasn't happening either for us. So I'm quite open about this, that, you know, we had struggles with fertility, because I think it's important to show people that you know, and then lots of people go through it. It's like, I think it's about 1 in 3 go through it. And it's important to show that there is hope, I think. So, which is why I'm always very open about this. So early 2000s, alongside kids not happening, I was also getting interested in kind of, you know, doing some kind of formal study on Sikhi and on religion. And I found that in academia in the UK, there was very little representation of Sikhi in any religious studies courses. There was pretty much none. You know, every other major religious tradition was represented. You could do courses in Christianity, you know, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, etc. And I was like, this is really weird. You know, it'd be good to have a course on Sikhi. And there was one used to be run at Leeds University, but then by Dr. Seva Singh Kulsi, but then that had kind of stopped. So I emailed Professor Kim Knott, and again, big shout out to her, because it was funny, you know, I emailed her in 2005 asking if there was a course on Sikhi running, and she said, you know, unfortunately not, but it'd be good to stay in touch and all that. So what happened then was, as I say, kids wasn't happening. I had a good job in IT. And luckily for me, my employers let me do a part-time master's. So I started doing a master's part-time while I was working. So that basically meant Thursday afternoons I'd leave work about, you know, 4 o'clock, and then do the couple of hours that was necessary. So I did that over 2 years, got a distinction in that, because my final dissertation was my article Head First, which basically looked at how young Sikhs engage with the dastar and their gears. So that was my kind of master's dissertation, yeah. And as part of that, I attended Sikh student camp to do some research on just because obviously there were lots of young people there, and we were there anyway. And I just thought, you know, it'd be a good place to kind of do some interviews on this question of how do young Sikhs engage with their hair and turban. You know, why do they? The question was, why do they maintain their identity, given that everything around us is saying that religion is becoming less important? Yeah, and what happened was, I remember going to Gurdwara regularly, and the people from the stages would be saying, "Oh, young people aren't attending. That, you know, bring your nyane." They'd always blame the mothers for not bringing their kids and that sort of thing. Yeah, but what I saw happening, and I remember this is the early years of the 2000s. There was lots of activity happening, lots of camps being organised, Castle Camp, Sikh Student Camp, Sikhi Camp, Boss Camp, and all that. There was all the stuff happening online. there were lots of stuff happening in faith societies as well. So I was thinking, hang on a minute, there's a bit of a disconnect here. There's Gurdwaras are saying nobody's coming, but there's all this other stuff going on. So that's what really got me interested. After my master's, I thought, and I got a distinction in that. And then there was a research program had just kicked off. Sorry if I stop me whenever you want. I'm just kind of rambling on, but there was a research program kicked off called the Religion and Society program in 2008, and that kicked off because of the 7/7 bombing in London, right? Okay. Which was basically 3 young Muslims from Leeds, or I think 2 were from Leeds, did the 7/7 bombing, and there was an interest from the government to kind of understand how young people engage with religion, right? Yeah. So this was a Religion and Society program. And they were specifically interested in projects on young people and religion. And as I say, at this time, I was thinking, okay, hang on a minute. I want to understand more about what's going on with all these, camps and Sikh societies and internet amongst young Sikhs. So I'd done my master's with Professor Kim Knott, who I'd emailed, all those years earlier. So she agreed to become my PhD supervisor because she'd done a lot of work on Hinduism in diaspora in particular, and lots of work around identity and community. So she's kind of, had the relevant experience. So Professor Kim Knott and her colleague, who again became my supervisor, Professor Sean McLaughlin, who did a lot of work on Islam, they became my PhD supervisors. So we applied to this program, got funding for it, and that's when I had a really, really important decision to make, because this was 2008, and I had this really well-paid job in IT. But I didn't have any kids, right? So the choice was, okay, do I give up this job in IT? Or so, do I continue in IT? And to be honest, it was all right, but it wasn't kind of, lighting my fire too much. Or do I give up this well-paid job and, end up being a student again on a kind of student, scholarship, which was very little, to be honest. It was nothing pretty much. They paid my fees and gave me very little money. But anyway, do I do that? And I thought, okay, look, I haven't got kids, we're trying for kids, we're going through treatment, nothing's happening, who knows what's going to happen. I might as well give this a shot, right? Yeah. So 2008, I quit my job with my wife's support, and shout out to my wife as well. And then, obviously, we had IVF. So as soon as I quit my job, obviously, the IVF worked. Yay! So then my wife became pregnant, and I'm like, oh my God, I've just given up my job. I'm now a student, but luckily, luckily, babies aren't too expensive because they haven't got that many needs. It's just a case of getting nappies all the time, pretty much, isn't it? So yes, I quit my job, started my PhD, looking at young Sikhs and how they learn about Sikhi. So my PhD, I was looking at, camps, Sikh societies, the internet, doing all these kinds of lots of field work. I visited all the camps. I visited Khalsa camp. I visited all the camps pretty much in a row. So I went to Sikh student, Khalsa, and Boss camp like in a row, and I was like exhausted by the end of it. Do you know what I mean? So yeah. Anyway, did the PhD. Lots of engagement. And then ended the PhD. We had treatment again, and 2 weeks before my Viva, 2 weeks after my Viva, 2 weeks after I finished my PhD, my daughter was born. Oh. So my PhD has been bookended by the birth of my children. So it's really funny because I think, if the kid thing had happened when it was supposed to happen, then maybe I'd still be working in IT. I probably would be, yeah. But luckily, very luckily, with the grace of God and everything, we're very, very blessed that the kid thing happened. I managed to finish my PhD. I got my PhD was, given an award for research excellence. And then very thankfully to the University of Leeds, they then took me on. I mean, do you want me to carry on a bit about my academic journey, or I appreciate I've been rambling on for quite a while. But...
There's just the one thing that I wanted to ask you. So you mentioned obviously that you went to all of these concerts, which in itself is just amazing. And to be honest, as someone who's like quite into their music.
Sorry, before that, I saw Michael Jackson and Prince in the same summer as well.
Oh, wow.
What? So Prince was in Manchester at Main Road, it was then, and Michael Jackson did a concert at Round Day Park in Leeds, and it was literally within the space of about 3 weeks of one another. Yeah, it was. Anyway, go on, yeah, carry on.
That's mad. I swear your generation got to like see some of the greatest artists, because like my uncles got to see Bob Marley, and I'm like,
oh wow, man, see, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I'd love to. And equally Cypress Hill people, although I guess you could still kind of see them today, but they're not like, it's not really the same.
Sure.
So even though those concepts in and of itself could just be a discussion on its own. And one thing that I was going to ask, and then it was funny that you brought it up in your research, which is basically, considering you kept your gears and your the start and everything, how was it interacting or going to those type of events where you would have been open to like a complete like range of people? Like, what was the kind of the response to your visual identity being what it was?
Do you mean at the camps or the concerts?
At the concerts.
The concerts was it was absolutely fine. Honestly, I mean, I used to wear I wore my stars at the concerts. No, I'd be right in the front. Seriously, I'd be pretty much in the pit. So it wasn't an issue at all. Obviously, you just got to make sure that you tie the star tightly, before you go, because you're jumping up and down a lot. But no, man, it was absolutely fine. No issues at all. In fact, I got a T-shirt thrown at me, I think, by I can't remember what the singer of the lead singer of Cypress Hill's called, but he was chucking T-shirts out, and I got one. Fun. So yeah.
And then because again related to your research questions, and how did you view your identity? Like, was it a cultural responsibility? Was it a religious thing? Was it just something that
that's a really good question.
Was that something that you just kind of grew up with? Because like similarly with myself, I think my understanding of my identity grew over time, and like as you mature, you kind of understand, or whatever, however you want to phrase it.
Absolutely right, and I think lots of the star wearing, and this is what I found in my research on the turban in particular for men. And this is why I often say now it's important to understand it is not just a quotes religious symbol, because I hate that term anyway. It is also a symbol of heritage in the same way that a Scottish tartan would be to a Scottish family. It's the fact that as I was growing up, it was just something that it's what I suppose it. As with lots of socialization, it's what becomes normalized, isn't it? So if you see every single male member of your family wearing a dastar, then that's just what's normal, isn't it? And you kind of it's what's expected from you. The understanding of what it actually stands for, again, I think is very personal. But for me, that kind of came later on. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Fair. So sorry. Carry on then, in relation to your academic journey, because we've got to the point where you've done your PhD, and then kind of you've got two kids which are bookending this amazing piece of work. So I guess you've actually got 3 children at this point, because you've got your kids, you've done your PhD, and then kind of you're at a point where like now what, I guess.
Yeah, so I was really lucky to be part of the Religion Society research program, because as I say, it was about 70 odd projects, and the website's still up, so you can actually check it there. I think mine was one of the only ones that had a significant Sikh aspect to it. But the good thing was that I got to meet loads of really important, scholars in the field of the study of religion as part of it at conferences and everything. So I made lots of really good contacts. The PhD itself, right? So this is important. This has also kind of formulated my research going forward as well. Part of the requirement of the PhD proposal was to partner with a non-academic organization, right? So I had a look around, and there was something that my dad had actually helped set up. The Bradford Educational Cultural Association of Sikhs existed in Bradford, and they were interested also in issues of how Sikhs learn about Sikhi, right? But they were particularly interested in the role of Punjabi schools and those sorts of things. Whereas I was looking at the kind of the internet, all the kind of new funky stuff, right? But I thought, okay, we kind of got similar interests. So I started having a conversation with the BCAS committee. I then included some research questions about the role of gurdwaras and supplementary schools. And it was really, really interesting for me, because I didn't appreciate the power of research. And I found this throughout my academic journey so far, that when I do presentations and when I talk about my research, particularly and what I call, I've just actually released a piece which has been part of the Vice Chancellor of Leeds World Changes collection, called "Not Hard to Reach but Hardly Reached: Empowering Communities Using Research." Because there's lots of communities who pay the same taxes as everyone else, but I don't think benefit as much from academic research as other communities. And as I was engaging with BCAS, and kind of I found myself explaining what research could do. I found myself explaining the research process. I find myself, speaking in my really tutti frutti Punjabi at, Govi Darbars and other events and in Gurdwaras and stuff, talking about my research. But I absolutely love this because, you know, you're opening a world that there's all this stuff going on, which as a community in diaspora, you know, I don't think we're always aware of. And it's what I saw was it's how important it is for us as a community to be involved in as many diverse fields as possible. And I mean, you know, media, I mean policy, I mean academia, all these fields that are influential. And I'm still, you know, I'm still one of the few brown people at conferences, you know, if any. I remember some of the first religious, you know, study religion conferences I'd used to go to, that there'd be me and a black guy probably in an audience of 200, you know. And I remember thinking, okay, wow. But then taking that forward, you know, representation is really important, because when I started teaching, the number of students who'd come up to me saying I was the first non-white person that they'd ever had teaching them, I was thinking, wow. And I make it a point now to ask my students, you know, how many non-white lecturers have you had before? And a lot say none. So it's quite a status, because it basically means I can't be rubbish as well, obviously, you know, because then they'd be like, okay, this guy's naff. But thankfully I get really good feedback from my students and stuff. But so where was I? Sorry, I've got off on one there. Yeah, no, the point of that was to say that this idea of community engagement and research and engaging with communities outside academia was the seed was planted in my PhD, and it's something that I make sure I do. And you'll see this from my social media as well. It's something that I make sure I do as regularly as possible, because for me, I don't just want it to sit in the university. Although I won't say there's no point of that, but I think the power of research can be just amplified so much more if academics make an effort to take it out. So because I'd worked with the community group as part of my PhD, Leeds were then looking to appoint some postdoctoral fellows with expertise in impact to try and it's again really forward thinking from a Leeds perspective, to try and kind of embed this idea that you should try and get your research out to other people. So because I had this expertise with working with BCAS, I was appointed the impact fellow for community groups. I said I was kind of advising other academics, often senior academics, on how to engage with community groups. I was doing my own research. I did some research at this point. I did some research on South Asian arts and the cultural value of South Asian arts. So, you know, what value, and it's something we can talk about, the difference kind of in pedagogy and the different kind of learning that people learn when they're learning, you know, an instrument, a tabla or a sarangi, versus the way they learn when they're at school. You know, lots of interesting questions around that as well. So that's something I'm also interested in, and links back to my whole religious and cultural transmission stuff. So I was doing that. I did that for 3 years. Then they advertised an academic fellowship on religious and cultural transmission, which I then got. And as part of that, I was expected to apply for grants. And you know, you've got to apply for grants to bring funding in. And that's how the CREST research project came about, which I'll talk about, you know, in a bit, but I'll let you have a word now.
Okay. Yeah, because I was actually about to ask, I was like, how does all of that lead into CREST? But you've painted a perfect picture of that. That's quite interesting, actually, that all of that then led to CREST. So I get that was kind of the sequence of events, but in terms of kind of the why was it, why at that point was the interest to do that research, if that makes sense?
100%. So I, you know, obviously I keep a close eye on I've always kept a close eye on Sikh media representation, especially as it's become my job to understand Sikhs in diaspora and the issues they face following their PhD. And I always saw all these, you know, headlines about extremism and radicalisation, and, you know, particularly in Indian media. And then I often wonder, you know, what's the reality of this? What is actually going on the ground here? You know, has anyone done any research into this? And nobody really had. There'd been quite a lot of research on 1984, on ethno-nationalism, on the, you know, the lead up to 84, the events following 84, on Punjabi politics, but not, and also some on the kind of on the diaspora, but not as much on the representations of Sikhs in media, and particularly around this framing of extremism, right? So at this moment, the CREST, the Centre for Research and Evidence on Security Threats, had just been formed. So CREST is basically an organization which is part funded by the ESRC, which is the Economic and Social Research Council, and part funded by the UK Security Services, right? Yeah. And they were looking for projects just to understand a bit more about the scene in Britain. And I thought, okay, this would be a good opportunity to get some funding to actually research this issue and understand a bit more about the realities of Sikh radicalisation and extremism and how this is all being framed. So I put together a proposal with my colleague, my ex-supervisor, now colleague, Dr. Sean McLaughlin, about, extremism. I referenced some of the events that had been that had happened in the media from the 2010 onwards, like the R4G, Respect for Gurdwara campaign, the Satkar campaign, the Nanak Shah Fakir incident at the cinema, the Anand Karaj protests, the Behzti affair. So I just referenced some of these, incidents that happened in the UK mainly, which had been kind of flashpoints, and a bit about, what's going on here, what's the story behind these. And a lot. So while I was writing the proposal, Narendra Modi was going to visit in 2017, I think it was. No, sorry, 2015 it was. When I was writing it. And there were lots of headlines then about this dossier that was going to be given by Narendra Modi to the then British Prime Minister David Cameron, which basically, I think, had 8 points in it about Khalistani radicalisation in Britain or something like that. And what was interesting was, again, I watched what was going on. What was interesting was when ministers then asked the government about this dossier in the House of Commons, the government denied ever having received the dossier, right? Yeah. Which said about Sikh radicalisation. So there was all this stuff in Indian media about the dossier. There were even, segments on Times X about this dossier where it was clearly outlined what the dossier contained. But the government were kind of denying all knowledge of this dossier. And I thought this was really interesting. Like, hang on a minute, what's actually going on here? So that's where the CREST research project came about. It was to look at and examine, and the full title is The Idea, Context, Framing and Realities of Sikh Radicalisation. And I put that in quotes in Britain because, and I got lots of kickback for using the term Sikh radicalisation, but my argument is that, look, the term's already out there. It's being used by media. So all I'm doing is I'm using it in my title just to see, what's the score. It's not as if I've made up the term Sikh radicalisation or Sikh extremism. These have been used since the 1980s. True. What I'm saying is, what are the realities around all this?
No, definitely. One of the questions that got sent in respect to the report, and actually I should have asked you another question first, but anyway, we'll get to that. What were then the definitional constructs of radicalism that you went by? Because obviously that term can mean a lot of things to a lot of people.
Absolutely, Emma. Yeah.
So like, yeah, like,
yeah, no, 100%. And that was the first thing I looked at. I thought, hang on a minute, these terms that we're using, what do they actually mean? Yeah. And I found that different governments are using defining extremism in different ways. So I've got the definition up here actually. So the UK government, when I was writing the report, defined extremism as vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs, right? So that's from the government document of 2015. And radicalisation is the process by which a person comes to support terrorism and extremist ideologies associated with terrorist groups, right? But what's interesting is those definitions aren't the same in other parts of the world, and we can talk about that, as the podcast progresses. But Mark Sedgwick wrote a really good article about radicalisation, and he basically says that although people use the terms all the time, you need to establish what they mean because they're used in different contexts and they mean different things. So there isn't one meaning of radicalisation. If we use the term, we can all think about what that means to an individual person. There was also the work of Moskalenko Macaulay, who distinguished between radicalism, which is a readiness to engage in illegal and violent political action, and activism, which is a readiness to engage in legal and non-violent political action. So they make a distinction between legal and illegal action and violent and non-violent action. So what I was basically doing was I was looking at these terms, extremism, radicalisation, how they're used, how they're defined by the government, what other terms could be used, and seeing if the Sikh cases that I was looking at actually maps to what these terms mean.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much it, because we throw them around left, right, and center. And as a community, we're really bad at this. We often accuse others of extremism without understanding the consequences of that, especially in a post 9/11 context. And just to say, no one really cared what brown people were up to before 9/11. You know, there were Gurdwara fights happening. You know, from the 1980s onwards, there was all sorts of stuff going on. No one really cared, but since securitizations happened post 9/11 and 7/7 in particular in the UK, that's when, you know, the security services, the police have become interested in some of the instances that have happened in the Sikh community.
Well, I had the pleasure to read your report, and also had the unfortune of being included in it as well. One thing though that I wanted to ask is and I think this is quite a general thing from looking at you do a brilliant timeline and you map all of the kind of events, like you discussed some of them earlier. The majority of them, and this is something I'm pretty sure you mentioned in your report as well, are Sikh on Sikh violence. It's very rarely like the Sikh community against an external community. What does that say about this whole framing and discussion of Sikh radicalism in terms of, or like the proposed framing of it? Because surely, like just by the definitions you went by earlier, the majority of it being Sikh on Sikh violence doesn't necessarily seem to fit with those. I guess you could argue,
that's my argument. Absolutely, that's my argument, that there isn't a threat to general society. The biggest threat Sikhs have is from other Sikhs. And the issue, and this, you know what, I'm laughing slightly here, but this really upset me though. Even putting the data together, I was like, what is going on here? We're a minority community anyway, right? Wherever we are in the world, there aren't many of us around anyway. And we're spending all our efforts and time fighting each other. I'm not joking. Even getting this, I was like, what is going on here? This is such a sad situation. And then obviously analysing why this is, and I was reading articles. There's a really good chapter by Cynthia Mahmood called Why Sikhs Fight. And in it, she basically argues that one of the reasons is because we're all Sardars, we're all chiefs. And I've said this to a colleague recently, that Sikhi, it emphasizes equality, which is a great thing, but the flip side of that is that everyone's opinion becomes equal, and nobody's prepared to kind of, think that there might be somebody else to listen to, or everyone's basically on the same sort of level. And we need better processes, and this is something that I've tried to do with my work as well. I can talk about this going forward as well. We need better processes and better ways to discuss issues amicably before they become incidents. And I think we are getting better at this, because people are recognizing the futility of spending so much energy and resource on fighting one another.
I wouldn't disagree, and I think you're right. It is quite upsetting to see that in the report. Although in a flip side, it's also quite like it's bittersweet in the sense that it also kind of negates the fear that there's some type of like threat to like general society or something. Okay. So your report, if I'm correct, was published back in 2017.
That's right.
5 different sections. So framing of Sikh activism in Britain, which I guess we've kind of like touched upon. Narratives and issues, which we've kind of spoke about some of those kind of the flashpoints. Transmissions of narratives, types of Sikh activism, and then the impact of that in Britain. So I guess we've touched upon it slightly, but through once you've done the report, how did you frame, or how did you conclude then what the situation was of Sikh activism or radicalism or whatever it is?
So again, a couple of points. Firstly, as I was doing the report and I was talking to people who self-identified as Sikh activists and people in general, and obviously reading stuff online and everything, what came through strongly was the ongoing impact of 1984, and that it's all right to say it was an incident that happened 40 odd years ago, but I think the emotional. I remember sharing a car with somebody who was in Delhi during November '84, who vividly, kind of explained what they'd seen, and it was really moving, and they just showed me some. Again, obviously, you don't identify the individual, but they showed me how do I put this? Something that happened to their body as a consequence. And that's all I'll say, right?
Yeah.
So that was really sad. So that came through to me personally very strongly. The impact, and I'm not just talking November 84, the emotional impact of June 84 also also came through to me strongly doing the research, and I've since then tried to look for examples where a religious community or a community in general have had their most important, shrine desecrated, in recent memory. And, I think Mecca was stormed in the late 70s, but it wasn't as if it was done by the government, so there aren't many corresponding incidents to Operation Blue Star.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand that, the emotional, and again, another important point which I'm looking at the moment is the impact of the digital arena and all this. So the fact that it happened in the 1980s and there were recordings of this, and the fact that these recordings have been digitized, and the fact that these newspaper headlines have been digitized, and the fact that people can go online and see these incidents happening again and again and again. If Operation Blue Star had happened maybe even 10 years or 20 years earlier, you wouldn't have this kind of archive online of all the events, which I think makes a real difference and is really important in enabling, future generations of Sikhs to kind of understand what's happening. So that came through really strongly as one of the main narratives, because it's unless you understand the emotions behind it, you may not understand why this incident or why exactly. Why is the impact, and why people are still talking about it, But so that's really, really important.
But I guess just to echo what you're saying, what's central to that is the core relationship between a Sikh and the Guru, and then also the history of the Darbar Sahib.
Absolutely right.
In and of itself as
well. Because the Beadbi that took place is the issue that's causing her. Absolutely. Yeah.
No, fair. So just, I guess, sticking with that for a second, and this is something that recently has been brought up quite a lot by someone I don't want to mention because he's not worth the time of day, really, simply because it's just further pushing a false narrative that we're all aware of. But the bit of evidence that this individual kind of tries to beat the Khalistan movement to death with is the Air India Flight 182 bombing, right?
Yeah.
Now, a lot of the Khalistan movement post that completely ditched everyone involved in it and was like, this has got nothing to do with us. We're not involved in the killing of innocents. Like, this was kind of him acting on his own and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
However, just putting that aside, how does that incident kind of fit within this jigsaw of everything that's happening?
It's a really good question. And you're absolutely right. There were statements from people saying, a Sikh would not kill innocents, but the consequences of that event continue to reverberate today, because I think I'm right. The Babra Khalsa is still on the prescribed list of terrorist groups in the UK. And that's a direct consequence of the Air India bombing. And it's also, and the ISYF and Babra Khalsa are still on the prescribed lists in Canada. I think in the US and in Japan as well.
Oh wow.
Because the Air India bomb, incident that it all started off in Japan, didn't it? So, and that's where this terrorism thing comes in, because if you are seen to be linked to or supporting a group that's on the prescribed list, so this could be, recently Proud Boys, the far right white supremacist group are on the list. If you're seen to be supporting a group on the list, you're by definition automatically a terrorist. So that's where the Air India bombing continues to reverberate today, because of the fact that those two organizations, the ISYF was delisted in the UK in 2016, but the Babra Khalsa is still on the list. So anybody wearing, and I've talked to people, I've seen people who've been wearing Babra Khalsa t-shirts and stuff, you would be seen as being a member of a terrorist organization as a consequence.
I guess wearing that in and of itself is a protest, though.
Yeah, no, I'm just stating the fact. What I'm trying to explain is the consequences of doing that, and why, for instance, wearing a Babra Khalsa t-shirt versus a Khalistan t-shirt would be different, because of the status of the status of the prescribed groups is very specific. and mean something else.
Yes, no, that's absolutely fair. One of the conclusions that you make in your report is that it is political, doctrinal, personal, factional, and/or governance-related Sikh vigilantism, which is most likely to result in violence in the future. And to be fair, being victim of that, I can well imagine.
Sure.
What I would like to get at is what vigilantism, like, so one thing that I found interesting was how, and also this echoes with some of my learning when I was doing my law degree, when we had to do, I can't remember what the module was, but we had to basically learn the terrorist laws within the UK. And basically the professor, just like you were kind of saying here, is the term means something to everyone. In law, it's extremely difficult to actually define it.
It's
pretty much now a political tool that the government use, and then you have to go read the case law and see how it works, right? So, and one thing that is brought up within terrorism, and one thing that was brought up in the conversation that we're having, is the role or the use of violence. So within the vigilantism thing, the bit that I then was wondering is, like, how could you further any of those political, doctrinal, personal, factional values without using violence in that sense? Like, as in, so for me, is there a bit where there is no violence and you're pushing the agenda, or is the violence not like innate to what's happening?
It's a really good question, I suppose, and you're absolutely right. I mean, we've seen in recent years, haven't we, that, you know, I mean, if you look at the Colston statue, for example, you know, they went through the process in Bristol, didn't they? They were asking for the statue to be removed for years and years through due process, and then, you know, the only way it got gone was because they got rid of it. It's a really good question. I suppose
I don't mean to put you on the spot. If there's
no. I mean, you're absolutely. I think what I would say, right, regards vigilantism, is where I draw the line. I think is where, and what upsets me most is again this Sikh on Sikh vigilantism. I just think if you're reduced to the point where you, and this encompasses all the stuff around, you know, we've had Barjaraks attacked, you know, from Keaton from the stage. If you're, we've had so much stuff going on, right? Where, you know, people have weaponized Naam Simran, for example, in Gurdwaras, you know, where they've stopped people talking by using Naam Simran. I'm like, what? You know, so I think if you've got to the point where you're using violence to try and stop conversation, that's just, you know, that's just daft, isn't it? You should at least be able to have a discussion and dialogue. I think, obviously, where you've gone through, I suppose it goes back to Guru Gobind Singh Ji's line from the Zufar, isn't it? Where all the means have failed. Yeah, that's it. I think that's, you know, that's the line you go for, isn't it, Nick?
I guess some people's fuses are just naturally smaller than others, right? And that,
but that's an issue, you know.
Nature rolls in,
I'm sure. But then anger's one of the band's jaw, isn't it? You know, so you shouldn't be acting under anger anyway.
Yeah. I guess also,
I think that there's a difference there. You're right. It's a really good point about Sikhs and violence. I think where you're challenging inequality and you know, injustice, then Sikh history would say that it's absolutely, you know, relevant. Yeah. But I think where you're beating up some individual because they don't agree with your definition of a particular term in Gurbani, you know, okay, I wouldn't say that's the way to do it.
Yeah. You know, I don't disagree. You can well imagine like how we fit into that.
Yeah.
So I get, like, one of the questions that I've got penned down to ask you was, like, what were some of the main narratives and issues that you saw across the country? I guess, to be fair, you've kind of mentioned a lot of them.
Well, although I just to say that, right, I think it's important here to talk about my research process as well. So I got the funding in September 2016, I think it was. Yeah, that's right. Did the research, and then May 2017, I thought, okay, I could either just publish this as it is, or I could actually go out and make sure that I'm not talking nonsense, because, you know, all right, I've done the research, brilliant. You know, I've got research skills as an academic, but the community, and this is something that I've recognized all the way through my research, has a lot of knowledge in it. And it makes sense for me to actually try and get hold of some of that and make sure that what I'm saying is right. So I reached out to Sikh organizations. You know, graciously, the Sikh Education Council hosted me in central London. Harvey Mandir, big shout out. Again, lots of risk in hosting an event which has the term Sikh radicalisation in it, but he went ahead and did it. And that was sold out, a sold out event. That was the first time I presented some of my research findings, got really good feedback. By good, I don't just mean everybody was praising what I'd done. I got some really useful feedback from the audience about my framing of certain things, talked about some of the incidents that I'd mentioned. And Jasjit Singh from Sikh PA was there. And then again, so they graciously hosted me in Southall. That was a huge event. Obviously, I'm in the heartland of Sikhi in the UK. You know, it was hosted in Norwood Green at the Khalsa Primary School. Again, lots of useful feedback. Good for me to talk about my research process, what I'd done. And obviously, as I was doing this, I was giving that, impact forms, asking people what they thought of it, feedback forms. And one comment that really sticks with me was that they said that somebody said this was the first time they'd ever seen academia engaging with the community at this level. And I was like, okay, this is exactly what I want, right?
Yeah.
I also presented it at the Sikh Research Conference that took place at the University of Warwick as well. And honestly, in terms of a research method, this was so valuable because I was getting feedback from all these different parts. I then presented it, up in Leeds as well.
Yeah.
And I was getting feedback from the community. I was kind of informing the community of my process. I was getting an understanding of some of the events that people had actually been a part of. We were discussing Sikh radical. So the rules for this, just to outline, were the events were open to anyone, right? But once you were in, it was no tweeting, no Facebook. Chatham House rules. Anybody could say what they want, so nothing could go out of the event, but anybody could attend, right? Yeah. And that was just to kind of facilitate an open dialogue. And I loved it. I loved it. There were people that somebody came up to me saying there were people in this room who hadn't spoken to each other for various issues, for years. There were people. We were discussing Sikh radicalisation, right? In an open format, which had never happened before. And again, shout out to Sikh PA who got loads of kickback. Why are you putting on an event on Sikh radicalisation? Shout out to all the organisations who hosted me because, it was a risk. People are saying, why are you normalising the term? I'm like, the term's already out there, but we're talking about it. So these events, I think I'll talk a bit about this now, actually. These events really, this kind of open dialogue, getting the community to talk to each other, it kind of lit a light bulb in my head. I'm thinking, on the one hand, I'm talking about Sikh on Sikhs not being able to talk to each other. This is the way to do it, right? So back in Leeds, and I started talking to local Sikhs who many of whom had attended my event in Leeds, and we said, maybe we could use this as a model to start some kind of dialogue. And then we formed the Sikh Alliance Yorkshire, and then we held an event on mental health in the Sikh community. And what we did in that was we used the same format. We got policymakers in who dealt with mental health issues, open event, anybody could attend, held it in the school around the corner. And again, it was like same rules, Chatham House, anybody can say what they want, but you can't tweet or Facebook. And we had a dialogue between mental health policymakers and professionals in Leeds and the community. And what I loved about this was it broke this reliance on a community leader. Because up to this point, policymakers generally look to community leaders to tell them what the community thinks, which is a complete lot of nonsense. This meant the community could engage with these people. And since then, we've held events on hate crime and bullying. We held a really moving event on Sikh elders and loneliness as well. And, obviously COVID stopped all that. But the three events we held, I think, is a really good format for community dialogue and engagement going forward.
No, it sounds really positive. I'm quite impressed by all of that. And I like the bit that really resonated with me is the fact that there is no community leader and it's community led. Like the whole community is involved. I think that's pretty awesome. And also I think that harks back to kind of some of the original systems that Sikhs in Punjab used to use in order to govern. So it's quite funny how it's come back around almost.
It works, doesn't it, man? The importance of Sangat is all the way in Sikhi, right? But for some reason, and this is probably due to structures in the West, we've become over reliant on individuals.
Yeah.
Even I've been, I don't want to be a community leader. I'm happy to speak on behalf of, but I can only do that if I'm still engaged with the community. I'm not I don't present myself as the only voice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't do that at all.
No, definitely. Just then to kind of wrap up in relation to the CREST report, So we've spoken about some of the kind of the similarities and some of the issues that you found kind of amongst the Sikh diaspora. Was there any kind of regional difference in issue, or was there any kind of like change in why they got involved, or what their roles, or what they were doing, or anything in relation to where they were in the country? I get England's quite small, but I just wondered if there were
it's a good question, Joe.
differences.
Yeah. So Birmingham's the hotbed of everything, isn't it? Pretty much. And again, you know, another stat that I found was there's more Gurdwaras in Birmingham than in London. I didn't know that beforehand, and then I took a bus. I don't know which bus it is. Is it 72 down Soho Road? And the number of Gurdwaras that you pass down, starting in West Brom, all the way down to Nisgarm and Hockley onwards. But I think you pass about 10 Gurdwaras. It's like a yatra on a bus.
It's the same in Coventry, though. You go down Folesville Road, and
Folesville Road, right? Is it?
You got GMP, you got Nanak Sir, you got Ramgul, you got three.
Ramgul, that's right.
I know. Then you've got Ravidas as well. You got and then you've got Ajit
and Crossroads as well.
Yeah, Crossroads.
Yeah, that's right.
Crossroads and Ajit Darbar, which are kind of off Folesville Road. So you've got 6 of the probably 7 or 8, maybe 9 Gurdwara just on that one road.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah. I know, it's mad, isn't it? But it just shows, and like Derby as well, obviously, you know, there's the West Midlands, West Midlands, East Midlands, Leicester. There's so much, that's where all the activity is, really.
Yeah.
I mean, because London, Southall, and you've got East London, Ilford, and the like, but there's a lot of geographical difference. And obviously it takes longer to travel anywhere in London anyway because of the traffic, right? But the Midlands is really where all the activity is. But what's interesting also then is that, so in terms of population, you've got the UK, Canada. Still, you know, the Air India stuff still, I think, has more of an impact in Canada with the Canadian Sikhs than it does, obviously, with the UK Sikhs. So that's where there's a distinction in terms of the framing of Sikh extremism in Canada and the UK.
Yeah, no, fairs. What, just out of curiosity then, what was the type of feedback that you were getting? Like, I know you can't be like super specific, but in general, kind of, what were the positive and the negatives that you were getting from the community?
I think because I went out, right, and honestly, I think it's one of the best decisions I've ever made. Because I went out before I published it, that created a level of trust in terms of engagement, right? And I honestly do not underestimate that. And any project I do going forward, I'm going to make sure I do the engagement, because, as I say, I'm not speaking about a community. I feel I'm speaking on behalf of, you know, I'm like, I want to make sure I'm raising a voice and not just raising my own voice. Yeah. So that the fact that people had heard what I was gonna, because imagine I'm thinking about it, imagine if a report came out about Sikh extremism out of the blue. You'd be like, what the hell? You know, where's this come from? Who is this person? What have they done? I've never heard about this before. Yeah. And because I didn't have that, because there was a lead up to it, and key players, key members, you know, key activists had engaged with it, I think that really helped. Yeah. So since then, you know, it's been useful, I think, to try and challenge some of the narratives. At least policymakers and media have got something to read about the topic. And if they're looking at reporting on Sikh extremism or Sikh radicalisation, if they haven't read the report, then they need to. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So at least it gives them somewhere to start.
Yeah. Just out of well, I guess actually, if I don't include it, people are probably going to ask why this question wasn't added in. Considering we've had the West Midlands 3 and all of the fuss around that.
Sure.
How does that tie into this kind of narrative of radicalisation and extremism? Because obviously the case got dropped and there was literally no evidence.
Yeah.
But in order for it to have even got to that stage in itself, there had to have been some kind of pressure, or something had to have been switched on. Something had to have happened for that. So,
exactly. Yeah.
From your perspective, how does all of that, like, how?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, I keep an eye on everything. And just to say, it's not the first case that's been dropped. There were lots of such cases in the 90s of individuals being pursued. And again, the reason these cases emerge is because of the normalization of the term Sikh extremism. Because if that term didn't exist, right, and if a Sikh organization wasn't on the prescribed group, this is what I'm saying. It's important not to underestimate the importance of this. So that is because these terms exist. That's why they keep getting people keep coming back to these terms, because they've kind of been normalized. And that's what I was trying to do with the report, was to kind of challenge the normalization of these terms. So, but the fact that they keep getting kicked back as well will also say to policymakers and hang on a minute, there's a lot of effort being wasted around this, really, especially if the cases are getting dropped. Yeah, so make sure that due diligence is done on these cases before you spend taxpayers' money on bringing them to court.
No, definitely. I just wanted to check before we move on to discuss like Balraj and his recent stint as a little celebrity. Is there anything that you wanted to just mention or include?
Well,
the CREST report?
The CREST report. It's given me, as I say, beyond the actual research, it's given me a really good framing of how to engage with the community, and this thing about raising voices is something that I'm really passionate about now. And any kind of research that I'm doing going forward will be the same, where I want to take the community along with me, and not. I hate this idea. I'm not an expert. I don't see myself as an expert. All I've got some training on how to do research, right? Yeah. That's it. But there's expertise all over the community as far as I'm concerned. So it's just I'm using my skills to try and raise the voices of these experts. That's it.
Yeah. All right, so rewinding a little bit back to 2019.
I could talk about my little boy.
Yeah. So rewinding back to 2019, which now actually feels like almost God knows how long ago. Yeah,
it's true.
I was saddened, but not surprised to see that your son had been a victim of racism.
Man.
And particularly at football camps, because they've been doing this kick racism out of football since I was a kid. I'm 30 now, so it's been going on for 20 years, two and a half decades, probably, if not longer. You only have to look at the history of black football players and what they had to deal with.
Absolutely.
Ian Wright, Barnes, all of these guys. Yeah. Throwing bananas on the football pitch isn't a recent or modern phenomenon.
It's true.
So again, all of my love and kind of prayers went out to him at that point, because it was sad to hear that it still is happening, although, as mentioned, not surprised at all. And then on top of that, we've had obviously the Euros final where 3 black players missed the penalties, and the racism. Every person of color knew
what was going to happen.
We all knew as soon as those penalties were taking place that if this guy's going to miss, it was going to be a racist opening, basically. And it was. I think someone actually got sentenced for a number of weeks because they had been tweeting something about Rashford. Yeah. So with all of that as a bit of a context, one thing that I found quite positive from it all, though, was Balraj's confidence and courage, not just to share it, but to share it in the way he did. Because I think, for me, looking back at that age, I'd have been quite upset, timid. I wouldn't really want to share it with everyone. I kind of hate the world, what is going on, and all the rest of it. How has it been since? But equally, how has he taken it all?
Yeah.
How has he been able to turn it just so positive?
Okay. Yeah, man. No, thanks, Summer. Right. So at the age of 5, I started him on football at the age of 3 because I knew, what boys are like. I thought it's important on the playground that he can handle a football well. Yeah. So I started him at the age of 3. At the age of 5, he wasn't playing matches, but I had a bit of a chat then. I thought, look, kid, you wear a burqa, you might get some hassle. Obviously, a 5-year-old's not going to understand that. Right? Yeah. But and it's important, again, to understand that this is a conversation that only people of color have to go through, the racism conversation. Yeah, parents have people of, and I've spoken to black colleagues as well. Everyone says they had the conversation with their kids at some stage, and it's really sad, right? Yeah. But it's something that we have to do anyway. So at age of 5, I said, look, mate, this might happen at some stage. And just to be clear, right, his local every Saturday football club, no problems at all. Very welcoming. Played really well, 2-footed, scoring goals. Everyone's a winner, right? It's only when, and he's literally just been picked for his school football team literally yesterday. But anyway, it's only when he went to a football camp, which was organised by a third party. Obviously, I think it was half term or something. Yeah. Took his, sent him there all day, picked him up. Looked really. I could tell. You can kind of tell something's wrong. Looked really sad. He said, "Dad, somebody grabbed my judah in the changing rooms, and they called it a snowball." And he goes, "Look, I tackled him on the pitch afterwards, but I was really upset." Blah blah blah. And said, "Okay, my Tika, at least you kind of got him back." But then he was supposed to go for the full week, and then obviously he didn't want to go for the rest of the week. Right. This is the age of 7. So I said, okay. I said, that's fine. I said, don't go for the rest of the week, but don't let this guy put you off football. He goes, I won't. He carried on going on Saturdays to his weekend stuff, right? And then about 4 or 5 months later, next holidays, another camp. I said, look, try this other camp out as well. Went to this other camp as well. same thing happened, right? Honestly, right? And you know me, I'm quite mild mannered, right?
Yeah.
But when I found out, I seriously lost my, you know,
Right.
I mean, I pretty much, yeah, absolutely, I completely lost my rag. I was like, what the hell is going on here? My son, you know, attends one camp, gets it, second camp, gets it. Same thing going for Judah. I'm like, do kids not know you shouldn't attack a kid's personal space? Anyway, so and the tweet's still up. I think I tweeted kick it out on the FA. I said, you know, you're talking about diversity in the England team. I said something like this, but you know, my son's just attended 2 camps and had this twice. How do you expect to get Sikh kids in or something like that? I'll find the tweet, but it's definitely still there. Anyway, so then again, shout out to Jasvir from Sikh PA, got in touch and said, you know, why don't you contact Kick It Out? So I did. I contacted Kick It Out. I said, look, you know, this has happened twice, and then obviously, you know, apologies for this. Again, you know, sad this has happened. Anyway, that started a conversation, which eventually ended up being, because then, amazingly, probably as a consequence of this, Balraj got himself elected onto the Equality Council at school. His school, right? This is in year 5, yeah. And I said to him, why don't you say that you can get somebody in to talk about, you know, football or racism in football? Because I was in touch with Kick It Out at the time, right? And I said, would you do a school assembly? And they said, yeah. So Balraj, you know, I got Balraj to have a chat with this guy, thanks to his head teacher as well, who facilitated this. We got Kick It Out in to do a school assembly about racism in football, yeah? Because Balraj was on the council, right? So that's awesome. Then, so I'm in touch with Kick It Out as a consequence of this, and then it's announced that on the 11th of September 2018, Kick It Out are celebrating their, I think it's either 25th or 20th anniversary, and the England-Switzerland game is going to be like a Kick It Out special game, right? And this was in Leicester. This was in Leicester, right? And that's Balraj's birthday. That's Balraj's birthday, right? So I'm thinking, oh my goodness, right? I'm thinking this is his birthday. It's a Kick It Out special. So me being me, I start kind of hounding Kick It Out, saying, look, you know, it's his Balraj's birthday. Thanks for doing the assembly. Is there any chance he can be a mascot? Yeah. And they're like, I don't know. I said, look, it's his birthday. You know, he's been through this. You know, can he be a mascot? And they're like, yeah, okay, he can be a mascot for the Switzerland team. I'm like, I don't care. So he can be a mascot for any team. I don't care as long as he can be a mascot. Anyway, email 2 days before, he can be a mascot for the England team. I'm like, oh my god, right? Anyway, so he doesn't know, right? He doesn't know any of this is happening, right? So anyway, obviously, I told my wife on his birthday. Said, look, mate, he didn't get you anything, but here's your card. Opens the card. Obviously, in the card it says, you know, you're a mascot for tonight. Yeah, England Leicester. So England Switzerland in Leicester. I'm like, he's like, what? It's the first time I've ever seen him speechless, right? Anyway, so leave school an hour early. We drive down to Leicester. He meets Harry Kane, Jamie Vardy. He meets basically Marcus Rashford. He meets pretty much everyone. Yeah. You know, Harry Maguire. He walks out with Danny Rose onto the pitch, like that, and that post went viral. I'm like, you know, Balraj suffered racism at 2 camps. Tonight he's a mascot for the England team. Balraj 2, racist 0. Yeah. And then so he's a mascot. Again, you know, he completely smashes it. And then Newsround get in touch and say, look, we're looking to do a program about racism in football. We've seen Balraj being a mascot. And they were only going to do one program about this, right? So they wanted to come. So they came home and they wanted to interview him about his experiences. And this ends up being the first program of the 5-part series, right? Interview him about his experiences. You know, he's really good on camera. He's you know, articulate. And then they email back a couple of weeks later and say, actually, we're thinking of doing a 5-part series. I'm thinking, because obviously I'm researching Sikhs in media. I'm thinking, is this the first ever series on BBC by a Pag person? I'm like, actually, yes, it is. So then they line up all these interviews with Sporting Bengal, which is a Bangladeshi football team in East London. Then he interviews Lyle Taylor, who's experienced racism. He was a player for Charlton Athletic. Then they line up Taj from Tejan from Kick It Out, and then Paul Elliott, who used to play for Chelsea, who's the FA diversity guy. So we end up over 2 days in July going to Charlton Athletics training ground, Sporting Bengal. Then we spent a day at Wembley, which was mad because then he ends up running on the Wembley pitch and stuff and all that. So So we shoot the series in July, and then it's broadcast in September 2019, where he interviews all these people, and it was really funny because in 2019 I was saying to him, look, there's no way you're going to be on TV on your birthday again, because the year before he'd been on TV as the mascot, and then this year he's on telly on his birthday again, interviewing I think it was either it was Lyle Taylor, I think it was, yeah. So yeah, anyway, so the 5-part series happens on Newsround, and then the BBC ask him back to do Sports Personality of the Year in December, and I think he's past it now. He understands, it's not everyone. He understands it was and this is what he says in his video, which is really powerful. He says it's the racist problem, and it's not him. It's not personal against him. It's something is wrong in the racist who they feel they have to, attack somebody or whatever. So he's dealt with it. I think he's actually moved on from it now. So, he's not kind of talking about it as much now, but because he knows, and he knows that, he kind of wants to show his skills on the pitch. But I think, as I say, I think he handled it really, really well. He's in terms of, and the comments I got from people, honestly, man, I got so many comments. I got DMs from people saying, we went through this. I got a DM from one person, right, who said that she'd been spat at going to school every day in the 70s, right? And I was thinking there's so much hidden trauma.
Oh, there's so much.
We talk about 84 is one thing, right? But we talk about there's hidden trauma amongst the kids, brown kids who've grown up in the West, and the amount of, forgive my language, shit they've had to put up with growing up, and we haven't had a platform to talk about it. But some of the stories I was told, man, people saying I went through so much of this when I was growing up, and it's so good to see, this young kid as a mascot, and then do the program.
For me, it was the way that he just owned it all, because I grew up similarly, like as you were saying, with stories from like my father and my uncles, and they were like, we were the only three, and they refer to themselves with the P word in that context because of the way that they were referred to by the majority. They were like, we were the only three basically in the location, let alone the school, and they were like it was like the majority of the school would just wait after the end of the day just to kick the shit out of him. Exactly. And he's got like a stab wound, and he's got this, and he's got all sorts of marks from the violence of these racists. And for me, it was also to see the way that Balraj claimed it. So for argument's sake, I kind of engaged with a lot of this racism at quite a young age as well in primary school, and there's only so much that you can bear, and then you kind of have to take a bit of a stance and kind of just resolve things. But to see how he just owned it, and then just like, and he's so, as you were saying, he's like just so powerful with the way he constructs his sentences and the way he carries himself. And I'm like, this kid's flying. We've got no problem, man. As long as we're holding on to the back of you, we're all good. Just carry on.
That's it.
But no, it was obviously sad. Like, you definitely don't, especially as like you grow older, you definitely don't want children going through that type of.
Well, you know what, that was the thing, man, because I thought, okay, we've been through this in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
I don't want my kids to have this shit as well. I was like, what? This is what annoyed me the most. I was like, what? Again? And to be honest, right, given the way society's going, I don't think this is going to go away,
No.
Given the way that, the politicians, the media frame this stuff, I analyze media for a living, right? These are powerful forces,
And like, I don't want to hark on about it, but like Brexit hasn't helped the last 10, 15 years of
culture wars, it's just like nonsense, man. Absolutely. So it's important. I think it's important for us to empower our kids. And although it's difficult to have these conversations at young ages, right? The reality is it's going to happen at some stage. So at least if you can see it coming, you can kind of maybe prepare for it a little bit, and then think about how we're going to respond to this as well.
No. And I think also this just kind of tying this back to the beginning of the conversation where we're talking about how like you viewed your identity perhaps going to these concerts, or how you viewed your identity growing up. Similarly with myself, I know this sounds kind of silly, but I never quite realized I was different until people were like brutally racist. And then you're like, hold on. So for argument's sake, one story that sticks out with me, and it's actually about my older brother, is and I hear it all the time from my grandma, is someone had called him like a top knot head, or someone had said something obviously quite racist or whatever. he came home and he was like, "So, Mom, am I different to like that guy then?" And it's that dawning of actually, hold on, like we are all the same, but my skin color and the fact that I've got something tied on my head sets me apart from everyone else, whether I like it or not. And then that started a whole. I remember actually having a conversation with my dad on the way, and he's obviously probably going to listen to this and then remember and then pick on me about this. But I remember having
that's what dads do, man.
Yeah. I remember driving to school one day, like, because he dropped us off in the morning, and I was like, Dad, man, like, I don't fit in with anyone at school. I was like, everyone, like, even if they're nice to you on your front, like, they've always got something to say about your, like, the fact that I have a bug on or whatever.
Yeah.
And that conversation was probably the most enlightening to actually realize, hold on, all right, I might not fit in with everyone, but this is my identity. This is kind of my history, my everything else that goes with it. And it starts off some kind of inquiry into who I am.
It's about owning your difference, isn't it? That's what it is. That's what you've just said, isn't it? If you know about this, the younger you know about, you're different. You know, that's it. End of the story. End of the day, you're different. So own your difference from as young as you can.
No, definitely. Just then to get your kind of insight into this, like we obviously spoke about your son and his experiences with racism. We've kind of shared ours. We only have to look at the England team and how they had to deal with racism after the Euros final, and then recently we had that Pakistan Muslim cricketer. Sorry,
God, that was a heartbreaking testimony. Yeah, absolutely.
The racism that he had to deal with,
like Yorkshire. Yeah.
So I don't want to obviously get into the nitty gritty of the events of it, so to speak, but like, what are your thoughts about kind of the root causes of this racism? And would it be fair to say that much of this still feeds off or still runs off old colonial stereotypes?
100%. That was my answer was going to be, this is empire nostalgia all the way. And the fact is, if you're a country that goes to other parts of the world and justifies your colonialism by framing other people in other parts of the world as second-class citizens, which is what happened, and academia was equally, a part of it in terms of race theory and the like as well. If you're doing that, then these ideas continue to resonate, and you hear from some of the language. I mean, even post-Brexit, they were talking about Empire 2.0. 100% colonial nostalgia. Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember I can't remember who it was, but they gave an interview and were like, "We're no longer a colony of the EU."
Yeah.
And actually, this is also because I think this photo is absolutely ridiculous. Is that I'm sure you've seen it, of Liz Truss's Christmas card or whatever, and she's sat in front of. There's a globe in the corner and there's a British Empire flag in the back. I haven't gone into like my collection, but there's definitely a postcard from the Empire that is pretty much identical to that. So I can't.
That's the issue with this country, is that I wish it would just have a more honest conversation about its history. And look, okay, you can't. It's funny, isn't it? People like to claim good parts of history, but you need to claim history. History isn't good. History is history, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this is something that Satnam Sanghera brought up as well when we're talking about Empire Land, which is he goes and I'm sure you're aware as well, which is in Germany. They very much
100%,
come to grips
absolutely,
with they've come to grips with Nazism. They've come to grips with the response to that, how that became, and all the rest of it.
And it's a more mature conversation. That's the issue with this place. Is it's still like a teenager,
But do you think
that's immature? Go on.
Do you think that's also because, and like this is probably going to come across quite crass, which is, do you think that the British don't actually have a history besides empire? It sounds quite like stupid, but as in, think about so I just look back at what I was taught for GCSE, A-level and university for my history degree and history courses, which was World War, the Britain came and saved the day. I learned zero about the input of empire. So it's always, so I think it was Nazi Germany, Italian fascism, Russian communism, the communist revolution. It was then stuff like the Americans in Vietnam, the Tudors, obviously have to do the Tudors.
The kings, man, the number of kings.
And then it was like society in England, in Britain in like World War I or something quite ridiculous. And you either look at medicine or you look at society. A-level was again, I think, Vietnam, Tudors, World War II, again looking at European nations. The only freedom I found was slightly in my university degree, But British history in itself, like, it doesn't seem to go like, as in there seems to be an obsession with empire. Like, what do you think that's down to, perhaps?
Because it's a comfortable narrative, isn't it? It's a comfortable narrative of white supremacy. I mean, it's interesting, right? So as part of my religion media module, there's a really good half-an-hour documentary by Professor Stuart Hall from University of Birmingham called "It Ain't Half Racist, Mum." Right? Look it up. It's on YouTube. It's absolutely brilliant because what it represents is it shows comedies from the 1970s like "Mind Your Language," "It Ain't Half Hot, Mum," and it talks about the representations of black people in British media, right? And for me, it explains a lot about some of the views around Brexit in parts of British society. Although it's important also to say that lots of South Asians voted for Brexit too. So there's lots of issues there around. I've been
in the kitchen where I've been sat there. Bless his soul now, he's passed away and he's a close family friend's father.
Sure.
But I remember sitting there. This was when, you remember when, like, there was the Romanian scare and all these Eastern Europeans.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of anti-migrant rhetoric. Yeah.
He was like, why are these immigrants coming
here?
Yeah,
100%.
He was literally saying the same things that people were saying about us. And he's again also one of those Kenyan Sikhs, just like my family came over here when Idi Amin was like, you guys get out. And we had nowhere else pretty much to go.
That's right.
It is crazy because I went to university with a guy called Rakib Ehsan. He's done a PhD and he's now kind of all in the news and stuff. And I remember having a lot of interesting conversations because his research was on how South Asian communities were on the majority, starting to vote kind of more right wing.
That's right.
That was feeding into things like their economic stability, their views of social stability, all of these really interesting things, which for me at that time, I was like, that doesn't fit with our philosophy. So that doesn't fit with what and I get, I talk upon like personally, which is like those principles or ideals or whatever policies don't fit with the ideals that I think I would define as being Sikh. But that's just me. So
there's a really good video on Byline Times about Priti Patel and why she's brilliant. Why she's one of the most hardcore Home Secretaries and anti-immigrant, despite her, So it's really interesting.
I've forgotten the lady's name behind Byline.
Hardeep Matharu,
she's brilliant. She's
absolutely spot on. Absolutely,
she's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Can't knock her at all. There's a couple of things, just two kind of questions that I wanted to get your final input on, and these are slightly more cheerier than racism. I promise.
Let's do it.
So obviously, congratulations on being elected co-chair of the Sikh Studies Unit
thanks.
at the American Academy of Religion. Now, for those listening, they're probably be like, "What does that mean? Why is he saying congratulations? Like, what is this chair? Like, does it have any, like all of these kind of normal questions that go with it?" So, like, could you just explain what the AAR do and then what your work involves and kind of what you're hoping to achieve with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the AAR, the American Academy of Religion, is the biggest religion conference that happens, internationally in the world. It happens every November. I've been there once before. I chose which one to go to. The one I went to was in San Diego.
Oh, nice.
It also happens in Boston. No offense to Boston or San Antonio or Denver, but it happens at other parts. But I thought I want to go to California anyway. It's absolutely huge. It happens in one of these, these conference centers where Comic Cons happen. It's like a huge 10,000 attendees, loads of panels over like 3 days. So there's a Sikh Studies Unit being established by Professor Michael Hawley and others since about 2007, I think it was, which basically has a Sikh presence at this really huge, really important religion conference. And all the kind of main players, in Sikh Studies, and it's important here to say that Sikh Studies is probably it is strongest in the US. There's lots of endowed chairs. So Professor Pashura Singh's there, for instance. Professor Arvind Mandez there as well. Arvind. Borgos there as well. Yeah. So there's loads of Francesca's there in Hofstra as well. There's loads of
just a quick question.
Sorry, I just name check. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Just a quick question on that. Why do you think it's so? I had the great pleasure of knowing Arvin kind of growing up because he used to live
Yeah,
in
yeah, of
Coventry, which was
course, of
brilliant.
course,
But
yeah,
like,
absolutely.
and I always found it a great loss to the Sikh community in the UK when he moved to the US. Like, I personally would have loved to have been able to just like knock on his door and talk to him. However, what is it about the US, or why is the US so strong in the field of Sikh studies, considering that the British Sikh diaspora is often viewed as kind of the lead like however you want to frame it, but
I think it was. I think Canada's taken over now, but yeah.
So why why is the US so strong in that field?
So I think a number of reasons. I think that one of the main reasons is probably migration history and the fact that the US only kind of limited migration to professionals in the 60s and 70s, which meant that a lot of them had been to university, and this kind of goes back to some of my earlier points, really, kind of understood the value of having a presence in academia, which I think we're understanding over here more now, but maybe haven't done for a while. So I think that's why, and obviously, you know, the professionals, they're in well-established, high status, well, high earning careers. So there's more funds to put towards this kind of thing. So that's probably why lots of the chairs have been established. And obviously the work of Narinder Singh Kapani has to be mentioned here, because he was instrumental in establishing lots of the chairs, particularly in the University of California. So that's why there's such a strong presence of and Irvin as well, Naranjan Kaur Irvin as well. So there's a number, I think about 6 or 7 now, Sikh Studies chairs across the states, which means that Sikh Studies as a discipline has a strong presence in the US, and which is why I'm really happy to be part. I think I might be the first. I'm not saying I am. I might be the first non-American, non-North American
representing
co-chair.
the British, then, right? No,
well, yeah. So I'm hoping, you know, obviously to kind of create more dialogue. Oh, and I must give a shout out here to Professor Christina Mervold from Sweden, who put on some of the early Sikh Studies conferences in Sweden that I visited in 2008, 2009. And who's kind of published lots of the books about Sikhs in Europe as well. So her and Professor Nut Jacobson really were kind of instrumental in my earlier years. So there are a few of us in Sikh studies across Europe, but obviously, you know, the concentration is in the US.
Okay. Two kind of questions that almost go together to kind of wrap up with. So, what do you see as the future of Sikh studies? But secondly, and I guess kind of ties in, which is for those listening who want to get involved in Sikh studies, or want to or are curious about finding out more, how are the ways to do that, or are there any ways to do that?
Well, so I'll kind of tackle them both together, actually, because that's part of my thing. I think, given my experiences with my own research, reaching out to the community, and I see this happen at Sikh Studies conferences. So Professor Pashore Singh's been good at this, where the conferences I've attended have always had a community element to them. I think it's important for Sikh Studies academics to ensure that their work is being engaged with the community. And so, for instance, I've seen Jakarta in the States use my article on Gurdwaras to have a discussion about Gurdwaras, and I love that. I'm like, this is brilliant. I want them to use the stuff that I've done to actually have a conversation. So that's the kind of thing that I'd like to bring to the field, is let's kind of bring the community along with us as well. For those interested in Sikh studies, I must admit, I do get lots of emails from students, and I really welcome them, who are maybe doing dissertations on Sikh related issues, asking for advice, asking for, you know, references and that sort of thing. So yeah, I do your dissertations. Students, do your dissertations on Sikh related issues, and get Sikh books into your libraries as well, because you can do that as students at universities. You can request your university, you know, buys books on, so you can do it, and that's the only way this thing's going to change. So do a dissertation. If you get interested, reach out. As you know, I'm very active. I'm very active on social media. Happy to advise wherever I can. But do your dissertations on Sikh stuff. Get Sikh books into your libraries, and go for it. Go for it.
No, definitely. I've gone over all of the questions that I wanted to ask and discuss. I think we've covered the majority of things. I just wanted to double check. Is there anything that you think we missed out, or you wanted to mention, or anything like that?
No, it's all. Are they normally this long about? I don't know.
I love it when people ask me this, because some of the podcasts have been like 3 or 4 hours long.
Oh, well, okay.
So for me, when it's less than 2 hours, I'm like, this is so small, this is so short. I'm so glad.
Okay, cool. So, that's fine.
No. So I think it's perfect amount of time. I think also I like just the natural flow of things and just allowing it to go where it goes.
I suppose one place to end is so my online survey is open till the end of the year. Nice. If you just Google, I don't know, Sikh digital survey or something, but you'll find it on my Twitter. Oh yeah, so firstly my Twitter is at Dr. Jasjit Singh, so please feel free to follow me and you'll find my online survey on there. It's open
until the end of 2021.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So that's it in terms of a shout out. But yeah.
All right. Awesome. Okay. Well, in that case, I just have to say thank you for your time. It's been a really enjoyable conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Likewise.
Well, this is why I like to do it. So I can't complain.
Great.
But yeah, I'd just thank you for it. Really.
Thanks, man. I'll be interviewing you about your online stuff as well at some stage soon. So that's
absolutely fine. So soon come. No.
Nice one. Thanks, Summer.